You'd mentioned the forbidden history of Easter Island. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, great question. I was just there in May. It was such an incredible experience going to Easter Island. It's a dot out in the Pacific, smaller than Washington, D.C. And it was actually shocking how small it was from the plane. You can see the whole length of the island, obviously, but as you're getting close, it's just a lot smaller than I imagined. But here are these 1,000 megalithic Moai statues on this island out in the Pacific. And it's just an incredible place. It was much more beautiful than I anticipated. I just pictured it more desolate, even though I'd seen pictures, but it was just a beautiful island. It feels like you're on a volcano. There's just volcanic outcroppings everywhere. But it is amazing because I believe there's so much more to this island's history, again, than we've been led to believe. Easter Island, is probably its most famous name because that's where the first recorded European, Jacob Roggeveen, he discovered it. I think it was 1722 on Easter Sunday. So they named it Easter Island. The local name is Rapa Nui. But it's an incredible place. You have these moai. You've got many of them that stand along the coast facing inward. But then you've got many more that are just in the most random places. It's like they were abandoned in transport, right? Like something happened and the project stopped. And there's so many legends concerning Easter Island or Rapa Nui of the long years. And when you dig into these legends, that's really fascinating because I lean towards the long years represented the oldest ancients that lived on this island. And Moai actually means the living faces of our ancestors. So it's all about deifying their ancient ancestors who had these very interesting genetic features, right? As we'll get into. But Easter Island is an incredible place. There was a lost language on the island known as the Rongo Rongo tablets. These were just copies upon copies of, I think, the originals. The only ones we have are like wooden fragments. So they're not ancient in themselves. But sadly, this language was lost, right? But what we have are the memories of the elders that were connected to certain symbols on the tablets. Isn't that interesting? So they've passed down the memories connected to certain symbols. So that's why they can say, well, this Rongo Rongo tablet is connected with this legend. So we have these legends of the long years versus the short years. And we've got these crazy statues, this lost language. We've got megalithic walls on Rapa Nui. There's one left at Ahu Vanapu right there, which looks eerily similar to what you'd see in Cusco, right? This is made of basalt. So that's like a 6 on the Mohs scale. Everything else mostly is made of the volcanic tuff, which is like a 3, way softer. So Captain Cook, his 1770 expedition, it's interesting to read. I love reading the old ship logs of the old explorers. Captain Cook, the great explorer, he marveled at the precision megaliths that he was seeing on the island. And he compared them to anything superior in England. And he even talked about megalithic walls along the coast that have all since disappeared. Sadly, to earthquakes and the pounding surf, they've fallen into the sea, right? And so a lot of people still today don't realize there's megalithic, precision, mortarless, polygonal wall on Easter Island. And I've even made a side-by-side photo I've put on social media that compares this right here with the same stone in Cusco. They're almost identical. So obviously, I think there's an influence that came from the east, which is Peru, right? There's legends that the Easter Island was once covered with, they're basically describing a megalithic roadway system that interlocked so closely together you couldn't see the edges. So did that have something to do with the transportation of the Moai? The majority of the Moai are found up by the Ranu Raraku quarry. It's this kind of the highest point on the island where there was this old volcano and this huge shaft. And you can still see some of the unfinished Moai up there, right? So one of the big anomalies or questions is, how did they move these Moai, And legends state that the Moai walked to their places, right? Well, I know that sounds goofy. When you get into it, the legends also say the Moai channeled the sacred energy called mana. And the mana would only start flowing once the Moai was completely finished, set in place, and its eyes put in. All the Moai apparently once had eyes, which archaeologists didn't realize until like the 1930s when they found a complete eye set. So they had inlaid coral eyes.
Coral.
Yeah, and something else. The pupil was something else, but the white part was coral. So they had these inlaid eyes, and they apparently had this sacred spiritual power called mana. Legends say they walked, and legends say they were connected to this sphere that could channel the energy. Well, what's interesting on Easter Island, you can pull up the picture of the sphere, Ryan, is one of the most sacred spots on the island is this sphere known as the Navel of Light. I think its Rapa Nui name is Te Kito Pura or something like that. I might have that backwards. I think these other rocks were brought later, the small ones, but the big one's original. This thing possesses magnetic properties. If you spin a compass over that, it's going to go wild. So it's interesting, the legends of a sphere, and here is the sphere. And so I kind of wonder if this wasn't part of the original megalithic civilization. This was something they had made, brought, used. So you got all these anomalies in Easter Island. And then you've got three or four different kinds of Moai. Pull up that short-eared squatting Moai, Ryan, right there. This is one of a very few Moai we've got that has, just kind of a normal round head and shorter ears than the other one. So this, I believe, represents the short ears. So on Easter Island, you're going to hear a lot about the long ears and the short ears. Now, the mainstream narrative states that, the Polynesians settled Easter Island not that long ago. 800 years ago, 800 AD, right? I believe the Polynesians probably did make this, and it represents their time. And I saw a couple other heads like this. Then you've got the red hat wearing Moai. Now these are volcanic tuff. You can see they got longer ears, and they've got the red hats, which actually symbolizes red hair. Puka.
And
Polynesians don't have red hair.
Right.
Right?
That's original on the top, and that's also volcanic tuff. The red?
The red is made of a different material.
Huh. Okay.
I'm blanking on what that is. Blanking on what that's called.
But that's original.
Yes. And you can see these red top knots kind of scattered all over. A lot of them have fallen off. So I believe you had the short-eared statues, right? Are the newest, that represent the Polynesian short ears from the west, which relates to, there's a legend of King Hoto Matua, the first king of Easter Island. Legends say he lived in another land that was ravaged by war and cataclysms, and so he fled with 300 of his followers, boarded 2 ships, and they arrived at Easter Island. And so he's kind of gets credit with founding Easter Island, and the Polynesians founding Easter Island. Yet I found oral traditions that state when he landed it at Akena Beach, which I've been to, they found a graveyard near the beach. Which, if that's true, that means the island had already been settled, right? So the point is, you've got the Polynesians from about 800 AD showing up. They probably came even earlier, though, because archaeologists have now found bananas, like petrified, from 3,000 years old. So you had the short ears, but then you have those top knot wearing Moai, which are representing the long ears with red hair. And this connects us to Easter Island and the Paracas with red hair and the Inca nobles with red hair, right? And again, strange genetics. We talked all about that, right? All these Moai, aside from the short-eared ones, have these strange genetic anomalies. Something else to point out, Ryan, is pull up the picture of that wood carving with the weird genetic properties. It's a statue-looking thing.
How did it get red, I wonder, that whatever that other material is? We'll have to, maybe Ryan can...
It might be called scory. It's, yeah, that might be the name of it.
Okay.
It's a piece, kind of another type of volcanic reddish material, I think.
The Pucao hats were carved from a red scoria, a lighter reddish... Okay, so it's a lighter reddish volcanic rock also quarried on the island. Cool.
Yeah, so let me pause here on this. So there was a bunch of missionaries that lived on Easter Island in the 1800s, probably late 1700s. A lot of them documented their experience there and their findings. And a lot of these missionaries talked about how many of the inhabitants had strange genetic features, skulls, and bumps on the back of their necks. Well, this is one of the 1800 era wooden carvings we have that are still left in some museums that depict these strange anomalies. You can see he's got a weird bump on the back of his neck. And so even Jacob Rokkeveen, I'll save the best for last, he even talked about how, like these missionaries, many of these locals looked way more European than Polynesian, right? And so, again, that's another piece of the mystery. So then we had the short ear Moai, we had the red top knot wearing Moai, which I believe were, and then we have the big ones in the quarry. Pull up that photo right there. So this is the biggest one. I think he measures about 100 feet long.
Wow.
And would have been, probably close to 1,000 tons. But you can see it was in a semi-finished state in the quarry, right? So the top was done. The sides were done. They'd extract the bottom. And they've found a bunch of basalt pickaxes all over the quarry. So that seems how they were making these ones. Basalt's the hardest stone on the island. Again, it's about a 6 on the Mohs scale. This is way softer, 3. It's still mind-boggling, though. Even if they got the bottom detached, how are they getting it up and moving it? When you go to the other photos of them sticking out of the mud, right? Thor Heyerdahl, the great explorer, he was the one in the 50s who first began the major excavations. And he's the one that revealed to the world that the bodies had heads. But what's crazy is...
The heads had bodies.
I'm sorry, the heads had bodies.
Yeah. Yep.
Look at how massive that is.
I know, that's wild.
What's wild, though, is most of them are stuck vertically standing straight up.
Right.
Which you wouldn't think would happen with earthquakes, with tsunamis.
Right.
So it's like they were intentionally buried, yet we don't necessarily find evidence of intentional burial.
No.
So what was going on?
It's almost like a landslide or something, or something like a wave or mud or something. But but the base of them must have been secured into the ground well enough to withstand whatever it was. If it was a landslide or just, I mean, or potentially just growth from, if they really are 12,000 years old, then you're talking about the growth of the land as trees grow and everything piles up and gets compact down. That's probably 10,000 years worth of growth.
Yeah, is that the sedimentation buildup
Right.
of thousands versus hundreds?
Right.
Right. So if the mainstream is telling us, well, this was made, 800 AD.
Yeah.
Well, is that much buildup really going to happen? Now it's important to point out, as Graham Hancock points out, that, during the last ice age, the sea levels were probably 400 feet lower. And so were the ancient builders living along the sea? Was the island way bigger than it is now? And would we discover even more down there? So that's kind of the mystery about how they made them. But now I should point out, there's one other type of moai most people don't know exists. So we've seen the short ear. We've seen the small top knot wearing. We've seen the large, the biggest moai here in the quarry and near the quarry. But these are made of volcanic tuff. But lastly, we've got the basalt statue. There's about 14 of these. Of the 800 plus moai we know of, there's only about 14 basalt ones. Now this one's in the British Museum. This was taken from Easter Island and brought here to Queen Elizabeth, I believe, in the 1850s, 60. But look at this. This is way harder material. It's only about 8 feet tall. This one weighs 4 tons, so not as big. This thing is, I believe, I lean towards this is definitely 12,000 plus years old. Precision. I've got pictures of the back of it. You can see a face on its the top of its head. Again, despite the weathering, the transport, the travel, the erosion, this thing is it's a precision masterpiece. Now, what's weird is, if you go to Easter Island, it's almost impossible to find and see a basalt statue. You'll see the short ears, you'll see the top knot little ones, you'll see the quarry ones. You can't find one. We tried. And they said, it's on such a remote location, you'd have to go by horseback. And we said, well, isn't there one in your museum? Yeah, but the museum's shut down due to some legal thing. The point is, you have to go all the way to the British Museum
to see one.
Doesn't that kind of seem weird?
It's weird, yeah, for sure. But there's known to be 14 of them.
I believe there's about 14.
And the other 13 are on the island itself?
I think so.
Okay.
Something like that. There's about 14.
Give or take.
The British have one. And the others, we couldn't see them. That's all I can tell you. But these are incredible. So here's where I end with Easter Island.
What's coming out of that guy's mouth?
Yeah, look at that.
That's weird.
Were the precision basalt statues made by the original master builders that likely came from Peru or with the same guys building the megaliths in Peru? They had ancient lost technology, let's say 12,000 plus years ago. They were carving these basalt statues with a harder material the island doesn't have now, right? Or with tools. I think this was the long years, the original master builders making these, the same guys who made the basalt megalithic wall we saw, right? Then you had a second epoch, kind of like in Peru, the Hanan Pacha. You had a second epoch of guys who came along and built the biggest statues we see on a volcano. You can pull that picture up, Ryan. They were using their basalt chisels, and they were deifying, Moai means the faces of our ancestors.
Right.
They were depicting this other lost civilization. This is what I lean towards. They were making these gigantic Moai in remembrance. They were even taller than the basalt ones. But I don't believe in any way they could make the basalt ones with basalt tools. Right? And then I think you had the Polynesians coming along 1000 AD or whatever, 800 AD, and they were making the smaller Moai statues with the red hair. And they were doing their best to replicate the big ones, if that makes sense. But the smaller top-knot red-haired ones were actually deifying an ancient class that might have been alive at the same time.